So when we're printing our lino block, we want to move it to a cleaner surface because right now I was really sloppy with my inking and I got little spots of ink anywhere. So I'm just going to put a clean sheet of paper underneath it so that I can keep the printed paper clean and not get ink on it. I'm going to remove that piece of tape. I'm just going to set it aside so I can keep reusing that same piece of tape later. And then I'm going to take the paper that I've already made those registration marks on, and I've got the little T, so that tells me that this side's the top. I'm going to take those pins, and I'm just going to stick the pin through those holes just a little bit. So not all the way through, just in a little bit on there. And then I'm going to take that sheet of paper, and I'm going to line that pin up with the hole. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Line the pin up with the holes that are already there. Again, you're not punching new holes. You're just using the same ones that you already made previously. And put a little bit of pressure down to make sure that those pins are in and will hold. And then kind of push the paper down all the way. That's why it was better to not push the pins all the way through. It's a little bit easier to push it down. Sometimes I'll take the spoon and I'll just kind of push the paper down around the pin. And then you can kind of just sort of lay it flat and kind of push out from the middle there. And then you can start your burnishing process. So just like before, little circular motions. You'll notice that the linoleum doesn't have the same kind of squishy give that Speedy Carb does. So you'll probably need to use a little bit more pressure than you did last time. And you might need to go over it a little bit longer than you did last time too. So I would say probably, maybe set a timer for like 4 or 5 minutes and burnish each one for about 4 or 5 minutes. So in this case, I started from this end and then I'm working my way towards the other end for burnishing. And that's just to keep the paper aligned correct. And I really would spend a good amount of time on this initially. The black and white relief one was a lot easier to kind of like take a peek and lay it back down. I noticed that it's a little bit tricky with the pin registration to try to lay the whole thing back down. So I recommend just spend a little bit more time than you think you probably need on the burnishing part. And when you print your first one or two, it's kind of expected that it's not going to print totally perfect. You might have some saltiness to it. It might be a little bit too light. It might also be the opposite. It might be a little bit too heavy. You might have over-inked it. So if it's a little bit salty or a little bit light, if it's just a little bit, it's probably just because it's the first time you're printing that block. So I would just keep, do it the same way again for the next print, and it should turn out better. If it's very salty or very light, then you probably want to make sure you're adding more ink for the next print. And if your details fill in, or you see like the ink kind of bled out from where it's supposed to be, then you probably used too much ink. So you might need to remove some ink from your ink slab. Right. This has probably only been like a minute or two, but let me take a peek anyway and just see how it's printing. It's printing pretty nice, little bit salty, not great. So I'll lay that back down, maybe set a timer for myself to print a little bit longer. Just to keep this video short, I'm just gonna go over it one more time. And if this first one's a little bit salty still, then the next one I'll make sure I spend a good 5 minutes trying to burnish. And you, like I said before, you can kind of lift it up and put more ink down. If you're having a really hard time with it, so you can recharge your ink, roll it up, put it back down, and print. If you're having a really hard time with it, it's printing very, very light, you can take your print off and then let it dry and then reprint the same layer again. But that's kind of a little bit excessive. So like I said, it's a little bit salty. For the next one, I'm gonna burnish for a little bit longer, but just to keep the video short, I'm gonna go ahead and stop here for this print. Pull the print off, show you what it looks like. So there is definitely some saltiness, a little bit of spottiness in here. You do see some of that Sharpie marker did transfer over, but because that's part of my key that I'm going to print later, that's okay. And you can see that kind of mirror effect that happens from the print. You'll also notice that after I've printed it, it got a lot lighter on here. So from here, I'm just going to go ahead and print every single one of those papers that I got ready. So I've got a lot more printing to do. I'm going to print that same layer on every one of them, and then I'm going to start carving out my second layer. So that's it for the first layer.